All right, so as we all know, there is no shortage of luxury brands in Asia, but Asia is also fast becoming a hub for more homegrown, accessible brands that really appeal to a local audience. So today I have Miss Dione Song, Chief Executive Officer of Love Bonito, to talk a little bit about the local marketplace and their growth and their business in Asia. Before we start, though, I'd like to showcase a video about Love Bonito first, and then Diane will join me. Thank you.
In the becoming and the blooming,
I will embrace the uniqueness that makes me who I am.
And even when life knocks me down sometimes,
I will remember that I am exactly where I need to be.
Through it all, I will be comfortable just being myself.
Love myself patiently and fiercely.
Let us come into our own.
Okay, Dion, you ready? Please join me in welcoming her to stage.
Thank you.
Welcome. So I'm sure many of you have seen Love Bonito. They launched in Hong Kong a few years ago, and there was a huge campaign, and you couldn't miss it. But I would love to know a little bit more. Well, our audience would love to know a little bit more about the brand. I know it was founded in 2010 by Rachel. It actually started as a pre-loved fashion brand, correct? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the journey, an abridged version.
And I just say, I've never been so nervous being on a panel
no,
before,
why?
coming after Philip Lim. So yeah.
We
so
keep it
awestruck.
natural. If we run out of things to say, we'll just get Philip back on. It's fine.
I know. And he can continue his story. I'll give you another 30 minutes.
It's all family here. We're all good. We're all good.
Yeah. So I think just a little bit of a story about us, right? So I think when we first started 13 years ago, back then the founders, in Southeast Asia, especially first in Singapore, right, there were tons of sort of international fast fashion brands starting to come into the region. But as Asian women, we felt that, hey, nothing was really suiting us, right? Nothing really fit, especially in the mass category, right? When it came to things like sizing, right? When it came to proportions. And for Southeast Asia, even when it came to things like seasonality, right, we were giving very heavy fall-winter drops, right, in a very tropical, right, 35-degree climate. And we're like, hey, right, why can't there be a brand that really just speaks to the Asian woman, right, that really caters to her? So actually, internally in the team, we like to say that we're a business for women, not really just a fashion business, right? We're in the business of women, right, meaning that we really strive to provide thoughtfulness, versatility, functionality, but while truly believing that, hey, can we also democratize fashion such that we make a good outfit affordable, right, for the mass majority, right? And that's really the core belief, right? We truly believe that every woman should be able to afford a good piece of clothing, right? And it shouldn't burn a hole in her pocket. So that's really our principle and philosophy, right? All the way from day one. So even fast, looking back now, 8 years ago, we were one of the first few brands, right, sort of in the mass category that started just doing things like, example, like just pockets in dresses. Because why can't women have functionality, form, right, comfort, together with looking amazing, right, looking sexy, looking awesome? One of our top selling categories today, for example, would be things like padded tops. Right? Because why can't you get, again, that functionality, right? If you want to go bra-free, go bra-free. But for the Asian female consumer especially, there's still the balance of also a little bit of modesty, such that you don't want to reveal everything, right? You're not comfortable with that as well, right? And it's something that has to still be sort of like even office and work appropriate, right? So that's a little bit of our story. Yeah.
Is the Asian consumer still really that different from the Western consumer in terms of their preferences, at least in your category of the market?
Yeah. I think one, it's more fundamental when it comes to proportion, sizing, and cuts, right? Where even when it comes to like bust to waist to the hip ratios, it's actually slightly different. And that's what we really cater to. For example, even things like pants, right? In sort of a mass category, it's one of our top selling categories. If you shop from sort of like fast fashion brands like Zara and so on, it is sometimes too long, right? For Asian women, and I probably can say this, right? When we go even on a larger size curve, we don't grade longer, we just grade wider, right? It's actually a thing, right? And I think all of you are in fashion here as well. It's not so simple. Investors tell us, hey, right, just sort of do tailoring. But it's not so simple as that, right? If it's a flare pants, you cannot tailor a flare silhouette. It changes the look, right? And the shape of the pants. And plus, in the mass category especially, you also think about how much the tailoring also costs as a percentage to retail price, right? For example, it's a very, very core concern. So I think that's one. I think two for us actually hits deeper, and it's something that we've really held strong. And I would say I think quite proud that we've held strong to this in the last 5-6 years, right? I think for us, the second bit is really more around representation, right? So even back in the days, we were always sort of just very clear around, let's use also, right, people who look like us in the catalog, in the editorials. And we're even getting sort of like Instagram DMs sometimes from consumers asking, hey, right, especially in Southeast Asia back then, why do I only see Asian models, right? And I'm not so comfortable about it. And this was actually 7-8 years ago, right? Even Asian consumers saying that. I think we're stuck to our guns, right? I think today Asian representation is a thing, right? It's a conversation. And I think for us, it's just a little bit more meaningful than that. I think you see from the video as well, I think in Asia, it's very, very diverse, right? I think Northeast Asian, right? Southeast Asian, right? We're all so different. And I think we try to sort of show the diversity and have the inclusivity when it comes also, right, to really representing the Asian woman.
I'm going to get onto diversity a little bit later, but first I just wanted to talk a bit about the brand's trajectory, because you started in 2010, and I think back then there were very few homegrown or say Asia-born brands, and now it's a very different marketplace. Do you think that this growing acceptance of Asian brands has helped your success, and what have been the challenges sort of moving forward as we are becoming more inclusive, but it may not necessarily be a good thing sometimes as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess in the early days, firstly, I think very grateful actually to be here, right? Singapore is not really known as a very fashionable city. So I think firstly also, I guess maybe where you come from, right? To be very candid, right? Perhaps it matters, right? I think Singapore is not the most fashionable sort of like destination. But I would say, I think over time again, right? I think there has been sort of a movement as well, right? When it comes to Asian pride, right? And representation. Prior to this, I spent some time at Sephora, right? And that was the time where we launched Fenty, for example, right? So even for African Americans, right? And for colors, right? It was a very big deal. It changed sort of the landscape of beauty and cosmetics overnight, right? Overnight variants, right? And shades, it became a thing, right? Just 24 hours ago, it really wasn't a thing, right? And every other brand became so much more aware, so much more conscious, so much more inclusive. And I think sort of a similar movement as well, right? When it comes to, I would say maybe not so much I think it's more about representation, right? How do we reach out to and represent communities, right? That are different, sometimes maybe a little bit more niche, right? But where, I think there is a place and a space for everyone, right? And how can we do it loud and proud? And there's a brand as well, right, for everyone. And I think that's where, we really come in, right? I think we're stuck to our guns. I guess the wave is now, right? And I think for Asian representation, we first started seeing just the shifts also first in media, right? As trivial as it sounds, Crazy Rich Asians. I was in Singapore recently as well when we had Gold House, right? And I think you see that shift, right? And just a change in conversations as well. And I think, of course, trends like K-pop, right? I think that helps as well. And I think it's a trend that actually unites all of us across borders. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about your business strategy, because you started very much as a very strong online e-commerce marketplace, and now you've ventured into stores. How's that trajectory been, and why did you decide to do that? Because actually online was a very, very successful market for you.
Yeah. So we first started online even unofficially, and that was on LiveJournal, so it was on a blog shop. And, it was, I think it's interesting, right? I think it sort of was more happenstance, right? So I think when every other brand, and then we went into .com, of course, when every other brand, I think back then was also probably 95, right? 95% brick and mortar. And when every brand was collecting receipts, right? I think what was interesting was maybe a little bit unconsciously, I wouldn't say we're sort of really smart or like geniuses about it, right? But just because of how we started, we were collecting actually, data, right, which we never really thought about so critically, right, and so sharply. So when it came to e-commerce first, right, I think that was important for us, right, because we're collecting data, we're building a community, and because we came also first from a more social media, a landscape, right, on Instagram and Facebook, we had the connection, right, which I think was actually very, very powerful, right. It allowed us to target and consumers even more, right, have more conversations, right, really sort of actually co-create with them. Right, so a little bit behind the name as well, like love, Bonito. I think a lot of people ask like, why the comma, right? I think for us, it's really like an email sign off, right? It's like a letter sign off, right? Like, hey, I think you're co-owning part of the brand as well with us. So when you work with our customers, VIPs or KOLs, right? Sometimes we switch out the Bonito, it's sort of their name, and it's a co-creation end of the day. But yeah, I think for us, it started sort of online. And then we started building it. We started realizing as well and seeing a lot of data points, right, which gave us very good sort of understanding of where to go offline. And I think when we first started going offline, actually our investors were like, why, right? Because back then, like 5-6 years ago, e-commerce was all the thing, right? E-commerce was all the rage. They're like, why are you actually going brick and mortar? But if you take a step back, right? If you look at your Monitor, right, McKinsey reports, I mean, end of the day, e-commerce is growing, but majority of the retail spends, it's actually still offline, right? It's a very, very, very big pie. I mean, I love what Judy said this morning, right? I mean, end of the day, we like to think about ourselves not so much omni-channel, but you're channel agnostic, right? You go to where your customers are. If we were a different category, maybe slightly different, right? But I think when it comes to clothing, right, and when it comes to especially like even female clothing, right, and our stuff where it's a little bit more form-fitting, sometimes a little bit more tailored, and we play with different fabrics. A lot of times it's sort of like how it fits, right? How it holds you, and you need sort of that trying experience, right? So for us, it's just very logically, it kind of makes sense to just go offline, and we think about our strategy in that way in a very balanced perspective, right? And I think next step for that is really looking into different markets, right? Again, in Southeast Asia, right, in Hong Kong, and now that we're popping up also in New York, I think consumers still love going offline, right? I think you go to where the spends are. So we try to just reach out to a consumer in that thoughtful manner. But I think one thing when we went offline that I would say that we were very, very conscious and very intentional about was, I remember telling the team, like, we really do not want to do a sort of like run-of-the-mill, right, typical store. Because if you go to many, many stores, right, especially in sort of like the mass range, it's sort of the same, right? It's all the same. You see, it's cookie cutter, right? You see a space, you see racks, you see fitting rooms. A lot of times, the fitting rooms are also not that nice and not that attractive, and you're like, why, right? Isn't it the moment where someone's very high intent, right? Someone's already picking an outfit, right, and maybe 6 pieces, right? Why didn't you give her a better experience, right? So for us, it was always around how can we think about the entire retail experience in a very different way. So for us, for example, in our fitting rooms, right, most people, if you've seen our stores as well, it's actually quite luxurious for a mass price brand, right? We try to give space, right? We try to give a very inclusive and fun environment. Another sort of
With the salespeople, or
with service as well, and a more spacious environment. Sort of pre-pandemic as well. One of the insights we saw as well in a lot of our stores right here in Southeast Asia, especially, is also was that a lot of times women like to shop together, right? Also with their girlfriends, and a lot of times you sort of maybe do a group shopping trip, right? So why not make it a little bit more fun, right? So we even introduce things like modular fitting rooms. So it's a communal fitting room, right, for bigger groups, because we also have things like bridesmaids dresses, right? That literally you're coming in with 4 or 5 of your girlfriends to actually try to buy something, right? Another interesting insight which we try to infuse subtly, and it doesn't have to cost a bomb, right, would be alternatively, sometimes maybe you shop with your other halves, right? Your partners, your husbands, your boyfriends, especially on the weekend. And a lot of times you cut short your shopping experience because your partner is a little bit impatient, and you see like very unhappy, like very grumpy men like waiting outside the mall. So we're like, hey, why not, right? Either maybe partner up with other brands, right? Build little seating areas, right? That allow as well, right? Husbands, boyfriends to sort of sit down, children to hang around as well, so that the woman can actually spend time, right, browsing on the shop floor without distractions. So those are just some examples, right? I think, again, it doesn't have to cost a bomb. I think it comes from a very customer-centric point of view, right? And really catering specifically to who your customer is.
how has expanding beyond Singapore sort of changed the brand strategy or even the way that you create clothes? I mean, I don't know if there's much of a difference between the Singaporean woman and the Hong Kong woman. I don't know. You can maybe give us some insight on that.
Yeah, so again, because we're in a slightly more maybe like tailored, right, when it comes to women's wear, and we play also an occasion, right, wedding and party, and again, we talk a lot about fit, right? I'm very conscious at the end of the day, of course, I think fit is not so homogenous, right? Fit is actually quite different. So we actually tried studying the market as well, right? When it comes to even women's proportions, right, from waist to bust to hips ratio, right? Where are there more similarities? I think in the past panels we talk about going to the biggest market, right? I think here maybe we approached it slightly differently, right? Because we started with a very Singapore core, and we're actually today we're the 4th largest market brand in Singapore, right? Just behind your Uniqlo, your Zara's, and Mango. So it's actually quite sizable, right? But for us as a brand, when I guess your pockets aren't that deep as well. It was around how can we find market to product fit, right? Meaning that I do not need to diversify and change up the brand too much, right? But I can find clusters, right, of similarities where this product can go. right? And that's where we started identifying sort of markets, right, that are similar in that sense. And maybe I think I like something that was said earlier as well, right? Not thinking about it from a country perspective, but I would say actually city perspective, right? So we actually group how we think about our markets, right? When it comes to more developed Asian cities, right? Even between, let's say, Hong Kong, right? Singapore, I think there are a lot of similarities actually. Fall, winter, I think slightly different, right? But I think maybe fine, some of the influences we get slightly different, but more or less it's sort of quite similar. And we see a huge sort of opportunity, especially in sort of the smart casual, work appropriate categories. Now that, we're sort of post-pandemic, I understand many people have to go back to the office, right? And that's one of the key gaps, right? Because in sort of the more affordable fashion space, you see a lot of casual, trendy categories and brands. You don't see that many, right, that are actually work-friendly. So that's one of our sort of more uniform, I would say universal category entry point. And then in emerging sort of more Southeast Asia markets, we try to group it by cities, right? And it's similar in that sense, right? Between even like, let's say KL to Jakarta, right? How do you think about fashion where it's a little bit more modest friendly as well, right? Even if you're not a modest customer, right? You would still dress in a slightly different way, right? And you would maybe learn you would maybe cover up a little bit more, right? Just to be a little bit more appropriate. And I would say the core pieces, end of the day, still hold, right? And end of the day, I would say I think fashion, because our pieces are also sometimes a little bit more understated. Maybe it's the right term. Our pieces are more understated. It's not that heavy on prints, where styling then is quite a key thing, right? So that's why we work very closely with our creative production teams, our local country teams to really learn how to mix and match the pieces, because you can totally transform a look just through styling.
You've been very successful with sort of engaging and creating your own community. Can you tell me a little bit more about that strategy for you, your social strategy?
Yeah. I think it's really reaching out first actually to our, I think to women who are very like-minded, right? When we think about KOLs especially, and I think this is a world as well, right? Where there is a lot of commercialization, right? Monetization, right? I think you see people representing just many different brands. I think one thing we're very conscious is, end of the day, I think authenticity is so important, right? You want to find faces and ambassadors who really speak to your brand and to your core values. So that's what we really think about when it comes to our community and customers. And I think this is where it also gets a little bit more interesting. We try to engage them, right? So we were born out of Instagram, right? Back in the day. When Instagram was still actually very, very nascent. And we include them in all our campaigns, right? So we may be dropping a certain something and we'll just ask our community, hey, what do you prefer, right? Design A or design B, right? Give us your thoughts and start voting or upvoting. There was a campaign, Black Friday, right? For Black Friday, like 2 years ago, instead of going on sale, we basically brought everything back in stock, like old sort of best-selling designs, and we're like, hey, right, I think these were the pieces that went out of stock, right? Which are the pieces that you really want back in stock as well, right? And we had the entire campaign on full price when every single retailer was going 50, right, 60% off in the market. And I think these are some examples where, I think you can really just co-create with a community. We don't do this as much as I would like now, right? But I think one thing that we, I think do on a more periodic basis would be just inviting, right, customers in a very good old-fashioned way, right, when it comes to just product testing, right? Because a lot of things are around sort of like functionality and comfort, right? And it's really around a little bit like how Lulu thinks about activewear, right? The science of feel, right? And how you wear it, right? It's not just how it looks. Right, so we really get women to come in, right? They have to sort of, and they're everyday women, right? So they have to go about their daily lives running onto the MTR, right? The skirt can look awesome. It can hug onto your butt, right? It will look amazing, but can it stretch, right? Does it have the stretchability, right? When you want to run off onto the MTR or run after your children, right? So I think these are some of the functionalities when it comes to everyday life that we put in, and that's really through trial and product testing.
Do you have a lot of women working in your office?
It's like 90%,
Yeah,
90% women. Our diversity issue is the other way around. We had a quota. We need to hire more men in the office. So that's sort of like
Well, maybe
changing.
you can do a men's line eventually. You never know.
Yeah.
Could be something, Philip. So with regards to USP, I think the fact that you have a specific Asian fit is something that's really unique. But as within the Asian market, it's one thing. But as you sort of go west, and I know you mentioned a pop-up store in New York, how does that work in a bigger global platform and environment? Because you have a unique niche that you're hitting, but then when you want to be global, you have to appeal to everybody. So I'm actually even curious why you decided to do a pop-up shop in New York as well.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I think the catering to the Asian woman, right? I think it's a niche and it's very focused, but it's a huge market, right? It's a huge market, and it's a huge market of highly educated, right? Highly educated and very discerning, right? Community as well. We actually didn't intentionally, right? Think about the US, right? So we had an international website, and I think this is where e-commerce it's so powerful and just gives you a lot of data points. We first started getting organic just orders from Australia first, and then the US, and we started just looking at all the names, right? Like, oh, and looking at where they live. And we're like, oh, okay, this is interesting. It kind of actually makes sense, right? There is a huge Asian diaspora outside Asia. And if you think about the communities who are there, be it third generation, second, right, or expats working there are very few brands that are really catering to you, right? When it comes to, again, maybe like fit, right? Even just basic things like length, right? When it comes to silhouettes, right? In the US, for example, plus size, of course, it's such a thing, right? You have plus size brands in the top 20, right, in the market. But actually, when it comes to maybe more petite-friendly brands, there aren't that many around, right? So I think that was one thing, and we started saying, okay, just organic orders coming in. We're like, okay, that kind of makes sense. And then part two, again, back to representation, that we felt that I really think it's the time, right? And it's meaningful to be at the forefront of this conversation where, I think in New York right now, in the US, we're really sort of pushing that Asian representation, really working as well with the Asian American community to have, women that are just part of this journey as well, right? And I think they actually find it very, very meaningful, yeah.
Do you think that they've become more open to homegrown Asian brands? I mean, they're not that many. And are they curious?
Yes,
do they ask
yeah.
about you? Do they want to know the connection to Singapore? Is that part
and
of the
actually,
branding?
I would say actually the first thing that really resonates with everyone would be around really the female centricity. I would say it's really that, right? Yeah, that it's a brand that really speaks to women in a very, very thoughtful manner, right? Where it's really around sort of functionality, right? Form, comfort, right? But also looking great. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to open up the QR code. I'm not opening up the QR code, you are. So please submit your questions. Okay, we've got a few here. Okay, as a brand that prioritizes digital, how do you think digital fashion, AR, VR, Web3 can help with your brand?
Good question. I was thank goodness I was paying attention this morning for the morning session of the panel. I think for us, it's really around, I think one, when it comes to sustainability as well, right, and sort of the whole creation process, I think there's a lot more that we can be using, right, from a technology standpoint when it comes to things like supply chain, the whole design, product development process, right? I think for sure, we're sort of in early stages as well with the team, but I think that's definitely one area, right? And there's a lot of wastage as well when it comes to fashion, right, when it comes to the creation process. I think two, which we're doing a little bit more of as well as an organization, would be really how do you sort of automate and streamline your work, right? Such that your teams can spend time doing work that they're really passionate about, right? And they, if it cuts short the hours, that's even better, right? And I think that's part two of that, such that people can really, enjoy work as best as possible. So those are really the two ways that we're thinking about it, right? I think things like ChatGPT and so on, yes, actually we do use it, right, in some form, but of course it still needs a human interaction, but it really helps, right, when it comes to copywriting, when it comes to product descriptions, for sure. I think teams should use it. I think actually everything down to even job descriptions today, I guess we always encourage teams, just do that first, right? Let it do the work for you, then you sort of like sanity check it, right? Why not, right, if it's there?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what advice would you give designers that don't have a business background in education? How can they make their fashion brand successfully commercial?
I think there were a lot of words of wisdom earlier. I think for me, maybe the first part where, I think today is a day where it's a time when it's really noisy, right? I think you have many, many brands. Fashion brands aside as well, right? I think when it comes to even startups, right, and the startup community, which is also something that I'm really close to, entrepreneurs sort of face the same thing, right? There are so many brands, and brands are aplenty, right? Organizations, companies are aplenty. But a lot of times I find that we're sort of creating things maybe because there is a certain opportunity in market, or like the addressable market is sort of in, right? Or something is kind of cool. But sometimes the purpose, the soul, and the heart, and the intention and the identity is a little bit lacking. So I would say that, right? I think the purpose and the intention is really key. for me, and I think that's really important, right? I think it's what Philip sort of shared as well, right? Sort of like the heart, right? Where people can see the heart. I think that really cuts through the noise, right? Because anyone can ride on the wave and just produce the next in thing, right? Whether you then become a true business person, an entrepreneur, is whether you can ride the wave and ride it, the highs and the lows, right? And have the grit, right? And tenacity to go through. Yeah.
Takes a lot. Okay, you talked about how Love Bonito succeeded using data and digital communication. Can you explain more about how data helps you understand customers or inform decisions or create value that is fit for purpose?
Yes. We didn't talk about it so much then. So when we first launched our brick and mortar stores, we were very intentional, right? I think we were actually quite fearful, right, going offline, because we're like, oh gosh, offline means we're losing all our data and trackability. So we launched a loyalty program, right? The moment we actually opened our first offline store, and we're very, very particular and almost anal about it, that, hey, we want to start offline stores, but we want to be able to track our customers, right? And every transaction that comes in and stitch it back in the data warehouse, right, to a unified ID, so that we understand her behavior online and offline. Right, so that was actually something we do, right? And I think, honestly, I think we talk a lot about things like AI, right? Data science today. But end of the day, rubbish in, rubbish out, right? If you don't collect the right data, right, in your data warehouse that is actually clean, that's sanitized, that's logical, that makes sense, you can't really do much data science off that, right? Or if you're not just tracking enough as well, right? Especially when you think about the offline world, then you can't really do anything about that. So for us, it was really around sort of like the customer ID and really linking back into a loyalty program that we started. Now it's seven years, right, since we first opened our first offline store, and just ensuring it's harnessed, right? But I think part two of that, which is maybe a little bit more almost traditional, right? How do you think of like marketing ways or train your store teams to encourage someone, right, to have an account, right, so that you can actually link it, right? So today, 90% of our customers are tracked. Who come into our stores are actually tracked and tagged, right, which is pretty high. But it's really, down to good old training, right, with the teams and just encouraging and enticing someone to start an account. Yeah.
One about sustainability. A lot of mass market brands are often criticized for not being sustainable. How are you incorporating sustainability into Love Bonito?
Yeah, I know we get asked this a lot, right? I think how we think about it, especially in our space, right? I would say especially in a post-pandemic world, right? And we're going to an environment again, right? It's a bit of a recessionary environment, right? Inflationary as well, right? I think we really think about our product. Again, the whole thoughtfulness is very important. And to me, I think that's really tackling sustainability. I'll answer a little bit why, right? Really why, it's because it's versatile, right? And there's mileage, meaning a woman can wear our product, right, through different occasions, through different times of her lives, for example. And it's made also of good quality, right, and good value for money. And it's not wear and throw fashion. I think it's a key distinction as well, right? If fine, I'm producing an outfit that sort of almost frays, right, and comes apart after 2-3 washes, that's terrible, right? But if it costs, $49, right, but $49 US, right, but it really holds, right, and lasts you for years, right, and you're keeping it in your wardrobe and you can sort of wear it to different occasions, that's great, right, because you're not actually creating waste, right? So I think that's really one key part that we really focus on and emphasize on to ensure that we're really giving our consumers as much mileage as possible. And I think versatility is a key thing, right? Today, when we think about even activewear trends, all of that, it's really versatility, right? There is a whole sort of transient transition between, let's say, formal, right, to informal, right, to gym, to work, right, to outdoors. You see customers sort of wearing things across occasions. And I think if you have that mileage, again, right, there is a lot more, then it's about cost per wear, right? And if the cost per wear sort of goes down and down and down, again, I think that's great for the environment. Part two of that, which I think, of course, is a conversation any fashion, brand and retailer has to take very seriously on sustainability, would perhaps be more on the people side of things, especially social, right, and compliance, and just really ensuring, right, that you're walking the talk, right? The factories that you're working with are, having the right environment, the right standards, right, for their workers. And I think that's really part two of that, right? Yeah.
Okay, last question. Many brands see Hong Kong as their first stop to enter the Greater Bay Area. Does Love Bonito have any plans to enter the Greater Bay market?
No immediate plans yet.
You can tell us about your immediate plans.
I'll share a little bit why, right? I think we're reaching out definitely to the Chinese market through Hong Kong first, right? Through tourism, traffic and spends, and then we're seeing how that goes. I think too, when we think about markets as well, we try to understand also where can we also demonstrate our unique value proposition, right? And I think one of it, which we talked about, was like the value for money and addressability and affordability. To be very honest, I'm not sure, right? I think how competitive would be in a Chinese market, right? With Xiaohongshu, Taobao, right? All of that. There are so many other brands, right? I think that can really offer, right? I think the manufacturing and the produce, right? At sort of maybe the same price or cheaper as well, right? So we really think about unique value proposition in that sense. But when it comes to markets, and we have actually a Chinese investor, right, part of our board, so I think we've had that conversation, right, and sort of like discussion and brainstorming quite a bit as well. But two of that when it comes to other markets, right, that we look at. So, I mean, Hong Kong, Singapore, Hong Kong, I think there's still a lot of room to grow, right? Spends are actually really high. We're actually looking more into like Southeast Asia, right? How do you really cater and reach out to the tier 1 cities in Southeast Asia, right? Whether it's KL, it's Manila, right? It's Jakarta, and then as well, Asians globally, right? And the huge Asian diaspora market, right? Whether it's across Australia and the US, right? And really, again, digging deep into who we are as a brand, right? And our brand DNA.
Great. Thank you so much, Dione. Thank you.
you.
Thank you, everybody.